Hey guys, what is up? Hope you're all doing good. And today we have a really exciting interview lined up. It's with Stefan. He is from SJF Attorneys and he is explaining to us what a DPC is. So, for those who don't know, DPC is a Dagga private club, a private cannabis club. It comes under different names. You've probably maybe a member, you've probably maybe seen one of them popping up. They are essentially clubs that are facilitating the movement of cannabis for people that aren't able to necessarily grow for themselves, but now they're able to get access to cannabis. However, there's a whole plethora of T's and C's, terms, conditions, because obviously it's not we have a default, we have a judgment saying that we are allowed to, it's in our constitutional right to grow cannabis, but there are some nuances around that and interpretations of that make this such a complicated world. So Stefan's been kind enough to give us some time to explain a little bit of the details of what you should do if you want to get into a DPC. If you're running a DPC, what you should probably some tips on what you should be doing, and some just general advice. So it's not necessarily the right way, but it's the way that reduces your risk as much as possible. So okay, it's the right way, but it's all of these things have got nuances to it. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy the video. Make sure to always like and subscribe. Hey, Stefan, welcome to this introduction or this interview into DPCs, Dagga private clubs. I'm sure you know, as well as everyone else watching, that you've seen them popping up pretty much everywhere. Everywhere every town seems to have a DPC these days, but you understand it from a legal perspective with quite a lot of experience in the space, and you've obviously worked with a lot of DPCs, and you hopefully will be able to give us a little bit of advice today surrounding DPCs. Welcome.
Thanks, Andrew, and to everyone else. It's always such a pleasure talking with you and just engaging with you. You're always so friendly, and I'm always just so happy to be here.
Oh, well, likewise, it's always a pleasure to have you. And yeah, I'm going to jump in straight away with a bit of a question. In your understanding, if you can just briefly explain what is a DPC?
So Dagga private clubs are specifically our interpretation of extending the judgment to certain users who necessarily wouldn't otherwise maybe have access to the cannabis. So we all know that the Constitutional Court judgment gave everyone the right to now consume and grow cannabis in their private space and then consume in the way they please in their private capacities. Now, this brought up several different questions. If you live in an apartment, on a high floor and you don't really have access to, or you don't even really know how to grow cannabis, for all you might be growing and consuming some very unsafe product, because how would you know to test for mold, or how to actually get a good quality product out of this?
And there's some overheads attached to it.
Yeah, we've got the benefit that we know the Constitutional Court judgment does extend to every citizen. It doesn't mean you have to now own a piece of land with a huge yard just for you to be able to grow cannabis. So this brings in the idea of the Dagga private club. So in its purest form, I've now got a little cannabis seed. I don't have any space to grow it. I don't know the know-how how to grow it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it to DPC. They've got people who are master growers, and they only provide what we call agricultural services, which is the breeding of a plant for you in a specialized manner. So they actually then would just take your seed, grow your plant for you, trim it neatly, dry it for you, and then they would then get your trimmed and dried product, and you would just pay a monthly membership fee for the agricultural services provided. This brings a lot of several questions, about what about people who don't necessarily want the whole plants, that only wants to either have a limited amount. And the whole thing about DPCs, and I always try to advise people, it's honestly just a risk assessment. You are always going to have risk. risk. People always ask, so when the police come, I'm the person they phone. Yes, please do phone me. I will give you some solid legal advice during the process of what's about to happen. But unfortunately, I don't have a lot of power when it comes to the police. My knowledge and expertise lies in the courtroom, and we've covered this, and I think in a previous video, where it is unpleasant, sometimes when you have to spend a night in a cell, yet alone maybe a weekend if they get you on a Friday. But unfortunately, if they got you for enough possession and they want to push for dealing, you can always bring the bail application, and the whole risk assessment is now only starting with your court proceedings.
Yeah.
So there's no such thing as a no risk scenario when it comes to a DPC, especially considering the Hayes Club that's got an ongoing court case in the Cape, and obviously that outcome will determine the legality of all the ongoing DPCs at the moment. And everyone might need to adapt their model or completely abandon it based on the outcome of that judgment.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so I mean, I was going to say, what do you suggest is, the average person sitting watching this now probably wants to start a DPC or is thinking about it, hence they're doing some research. I would have thought their first step would be to see someone like yourself in terms of a consultation. Is that what you're seeing at the moment?
That's actually what you think. And it's not what I'm seeing at the moment. It's not because it might not be so. Maybe they just go to their own local attorneys and act on their advice. But I highly doubt that, because I hardly see that, or I not oftenly see it. Because the thing is, if you come to us, for example, and say you want to start a DPC, we'll assist you with your documentation, one of which is like you need to have a legal opinion. This is white on black on white that you've got in writing what's the modus operandi of your club. And that's an easy document for if the police comes to knock on your door to provide to them, say, listen, this is the kind of business we run here, and we are acting based on the advice of our attorneys.
Yeah.
But again, that's never going to protect you fully from an arrest, perhaps. But should you come in front of a judge, we're already accepting some of the liability because we gave you the interpretation of our definition of the judgment. Now, also very important, this legal opinion sets out a DPC in its purest form, again, the least risk scenario. If I give you an opinion and you follow it to the letter, yes, you will have a low risk scenario. But now every time for more profitability, people start tweaking the system. And now while I've given you a legal opinion, you are only following it to a 10th of what I'm saying. So the more you go off the legal opinion, the higher your risk is for successful prosecution.
And I think if you're doing a DPC, you're going to want to know that that line of, you want to know, and you always should know in your head, like how far you're straying away from that line, at least, it's like, just so you have your senses of saying, okay, I remember that chat saying that this is what I should be doing, at least so and then you don't get to the situation where you're being, you're making your one phone call from wherever they've thrown you, and now you're saying, oh, but what was I supposed to be doing?
Yeah, no, it is highly so. And like people always it's always the same areas. I find, like, for example, the seed supply, it's always been a bit of a tough question because you can't actually sell them the seeds. The seed still falls under the definition of cannabis. So even if you sell your member the seed at 100 Rand and then they pay the monthly membership fee for the agricultural services, you could still be seen as dealing in cannabis, even if it's slightest. And again, you might see that as, no, they'll never prosecute me just for selling the seed. It's not my job to tell you what the NPA will and will not prosecute you. It's my job to advise you of the risk that the seed still falls under the definition of cannabis. So therefore, you selling the seed, you're selling cannabis. Therefore, they
Interesting.
bring you the seed. Or, now we get the situation where the club can maybe have like a mother plant, because you can donate clones freely.
Mm,
So maybe the club can donate you a clone from their mother plant, instead of actually selling you seedlings. So there are
mm,
ways that people do tend to interpret it into their own way. And again, it's always a risk assessment, because the further down the line you go, the more risk you add. The same
mm,
with
mm.
delivery. Once your product is now finished, can they send you your product? We always say no, obviously, because it's an extra risk.
Mm.
Better to have the member come and collect their product, because
Sign
now
for it
the
or
risk,
something.
exactly, the risk is now moved from the club to the member, and it's much easier for a member to defend his own personal possession than it ever would be for a club acting as a
Yeah.
business to now try and explain to
Mm.
a lay police person, the modus operandi of what you're doing.
Right. You mentioned profitability as obviously one of the things. And from my understanding, the perfect DPC is a nonprofit organization, a foundation club model, which in my definition, I understand it as that means that they shouldn't essentially be profit. And I think a lot of people might get turned off at that prospect because they obviously want to get into this industry because it is a booming space to be. It's an underserved market. But how are people sort of navigating that balance between maintaining a nonprofit and also making it worth their while?
Well, I think it's important. Yeah, very good question. Thanks for asking, Andrew. And even though a non-profit doesn't necessarily have profits that they pay out to their shareholders at the end of the year, it's still very much run like a business. So you can still pay out salaries. You can still, buy the equipment and run everything through the non-profit organization. But it's also going to lessen your risk again when it
Mm.
comes to a prosecution event. When you say, obviously, the whole idea around they're not NPCs as to get the communities involved and uplift the communities. And
Yeah.
if we're just going to commercialize this as a business, it was never, I think, the intended model.
Mm.
Maybe you could do it that way. We would just always, again, you're adding risk, unnecessary risk. You can
Yeah.
always,
Yeah.
depending on the time and effort that you put into your own DPC, you allocate salaries.
Mm.
So there is ways to always get it turned around. But in terms of profitability, it's kind of striking to see how far people have recently pushed
Mm.
these DPCs. Playing with fire, a lot of them, and
Yeah.
they do come to me a lot of the times. And as I explain the legal opinion that they should have had, it's always a bit too late in that
Mm.
situation. So I really advise. I know starting a DPC is especially because if we all had millions of rands, we would all be having facilities and exporting, and
Yeah.
we'd all be having a Merry Christmas. But unfortunately, it's a bit more third world country, South Africa like, and we all do seem to struggle a bit more, especially regarding COVID. And this is maybe a much more affordable way to enter a cannabis market.
Yeah.
And I really respect the fact that people, are just trying to make a living. And
Push the boundaries as well, to do so.
there is a lot of attorneys out there that do rip off quite a lot of good people out there, and maybe even an industry they don't necessarily understand. But it is definitely worthwhile, even if you go to your local attorney, saying that you want that legal opinion regarding the DPC in writing,
Mm.
because that's always going to be a good way to tell the magistrate that you are acting on legal advice.
Yeah.
I highly doubt that the magistrate is going to punish the client who was acting based on the advice of his attorney.
Yeah.
If anything, he would be coming after the attorneys giving the legal opinion, because they were necessarily not giving the right interpretation or the right advice.
Is that I just want to for back on the profitability, I just want to put in a disclaimer that I'm not encouraging you guys to go make businesses out of this. I don't think that's where the model is aligned for, and it is happening. It's just purely as it is. It's a nonprofit, and you do have to have a fair amount in return for your efforts. Just as a disclaimer, I don't want you guys to go and make like 10 franchises of this. I don't think that's where the model is meant for. And I think, Stefan, I assume you would agree that's going far off the risk assessment in that situation.
You want to welcome that sort of risk, just don't be surprised if you end up calling me in the first week of operations. And needing me for months thereafter.
100%.
It is really a risk, almost risk assessment.
And Stefan, on the, I know this is going to probably be a tricky one to ask, but is there a way you could just benchmark like obviously there's a lot of setup that goes into like a benchmark quote that someone should expect to see, whether it's, I mean, I suppose you can only speak for yourself and you can't speak for other attorneys, but as you said, there is no standard. You can't go and Google, oh, how much am I supposed to, how much roughly would an attorney cost me to give me some advice on this, on a DPC? And I know yours, you have like, it's a speciality and you have probably, way more experience than the average attorney would. So if you guys need to factor all of those things in, but if you could give a range.
Tricky question, especially for me personally, I try to keep it as possible, regardless of how specialized I am. I've been blessed enough with the law firm having a lot of other legal work as well, and that allows me to keep the cannabis department similar to a non-profit. I never entered this space thinking this is going to be where the dollars were made. I entered this space because I saw there was something wrong with the system, and I'm actually in a position to maybe make a difference. So, I would say anything from 25,000 to 100. You're looking at 25,000, and if you maybe just need the basic documentations from your attorneys. I would always recommend, which I think where other people have been lacking, I always recommend if you can save the extra buck, a site inspection is always well, because even though I do the model for you based off the documentation, it's so much more effective. Your documentation is actually customized to your club, either the facility where you do the growing or cultivating, especially then if you look at these cannabis spaces then, which the clubs also often have, which there's nothing wrong with. If you've got a members only space where people come and even bring their own cannabis to consume, like I know quite a lot of the DPCs have. So it's always recommended to then at least just go the extra mile to customize it. But I mean, again, if you just want to enter the market and at least just have the documents, then that's what you're still looking at.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And I think guys listening, it's not a must. It is a recommended thing. You don't need to do these, sit with an attorney to start a DPC. There is guidelines from the Fields of Green for All and the Dagga couple on how to start a DPC. And it's very laid out. And as you said, most people are doing that. If you get to a point where your DPC is making some returns and you want to make it a little bit more sustainable and you're helping your community and you don't want to now disappear all of a sudden, you could also come at a certain middle point and a down point. It's something that, I just couldn't imagine having to, all the work you put into it with equipment and things like that, and for something to jeopardize that. And it sucks because we're in that limited space. But yeah, I would, whichever you guys decide to do listening is probably both acceptable. Stefan, on some closing notes, do you have any sort of major problem areas that people let slide in the DPC world that are that are really straying them far from the risk line?
Yeah, so I think like DPCs I've seen recently where members can come in and buy or distribute like their 2 grams at a at with any given stage, and it's this whole sharing model of the club kind of putting the members' cannabis together, and then obviously you share it. Well, and I think it's important for everyone just to understand the pure model was, as I said, they even provide you maybe with the seeds, you grow the plants, and you give it back to them. And it is a bit of a, as I said, a struggle because for me especially, I like maybe a few different strains. So I don't necessarily want, even though it's fantastic that this plant now gives me 100 to even 150 grams of White Widow, now I'm going to be smoking White Widow for the rest of the year.
You better like it.
So you better love it. So yeah, exactly. And I do understand, and there are more technical ways that you can maybe approach the whole sharing concept. There are many ways to skin a cat, and this is why it's always recommended you at least just come and see your attorney to get the advice of at least someone who's read the law and knows the interpretation, and especially the transport. I know you want to get your cannabis to your member. It is just such an increase in risk. We always would rather recommend a collection point, either from the membership area or at any, you agree at a meeting point to go and collect and hand over, because courier services are still being detaining packages.
Yeah.
For the reasons I do not know. No one has been able to actually give a clear indication of whether this right bestowed upon us should now be extended to the right to transport. It's fully legal for me to donate to you up to almost like 100 grams, Andrew. But now, do you need to fly here in order for me to
collect it
myself so you can fly with it back so it's your personal property? It makes no sense if I want to gift it to you. But again, I think it does open the door to a lot of the illicit market. Now, if you send a package, how do you prove that that person didn't pay for the contents of that package? How do you prove that it was a gift? I have to put a happy birthday card in every single package. It could jeopardize the system, but I've seen also people trying to push for transport. I always recommend rather not to do it, because your risk now gets increased for routine search. Please ask where you're getting the cannabis. I know you're transporting this club. You're basically telling him where all your cannabis is. And if you just tries to be difficult now, you can always come back with the whole team to inspect. And even that inspection they sometimes do causes more harm than good.
I have some pointers that I've got just stashed away in my noggin. It's called a private club for a reason. It's not meant to be advertised on the radio. It's not meant to be advertised on Facebook and on a website and things like that. It's meant to be a word of mouth thing. And I see people advertising their DPCs. I mean, to an extent, you can let people know, but I wouldn't, if you want to do a DPC, it's meant to be private, and I think that's also going to help in your case. But if you're bellowing it all over the radio or TV or whatever, you're probably going to get in some sort of trouble. And then I also think it's probably going to be advisable to pay your taxes and your make sure your finances are in order. I know they're always getting these cocaine dealers. They can't get them on trafficking, but they can get them on tax evasion. So yeah, I think that would probably be, obviously it's a different world for cannabis, but I would still make sure to stay on form of that, just to be on the safe side. Not legal advice is my disclaimer.
Well, I do 20 I approve that legal advice.
Okay, brilliant.
And when it comes to your tax, I wouldn't necessarily go all out and, on the DPCs, on your invoices, invoice each person, okay, White Widow, cannabis, sativa, 5 grams. There's always more clever ways you can word your herbs being actually disposed or to hand it out to your members, because you've got to remember the whole idea of that, as you said, private members cannabis club is to totally do away with the medicinal. No red tape. This is supposed to be like a community thing, just to get the community who actually do not have access to their cannabis,
Yeah.
give them the easiest, most risk-free solution to maybe get some
100%. Stefan, on a closing note, where can the guys get in contact with you if they would like to hear a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. On Instagram, it's 2420. Otherwise, you can go into my law firm's website. It's www.the2420.co.za. You can send me an email to info@the2420.co.za, and I'll be sure to get all your queries from there. If you go onto the website, you're more than welcome to just obviously leave your contact details and your query there. They'll automatically pop in.
100%. And guys, anyone starting a DPC and looking for equipment, we're your guys. So you can always reach out to us for that. And Stefan, thank you so much for your time today. It really means the world to us to have this info.
More than welcome to talk to you guys anytime.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much. And we'll hopefully see you again in the future. And till then, cheers.
Thanks so much, Andrew.